Thank you. Well, look, I'm going to take 10 minutes or so to talk you through the climate science. And I know that you are a collective of people who deal with climate change, but my experience in the last year, particularly the National Emergency Brief, has been that people are not up to speed with the immediacy and gravity of the problem. So I'm going to give you the latest data, including up to 35 minutes ago, and explain to you why we're in such trouble. The first problem is that emissions are increasing. They may plateau a little bit this year, but they have been rising continuously, 0.8% the year before last, 1.1% last year. That is trapping a lot more energy. And if we convert that into Hiroshima bombs worth of energy, we went up from 3 Hiroshima bombs a second of energy gain from greenhouse gases in 2002. And this year, we're at 14.8 Hiroshima bombs of energy a second. And you can see that here in a 5-year rolling graph. This is the 5-year average, and this year is that dot. And for reasons I'll explain, there's a reason why that has suddenly lurched upwards and why that's not going to slow down. Remember that this cooking of ourselves will continue for a very long time. The CO2 we emit today will take fully 400,000 years to have gone for a kilo of CO2 we emit today. A fifth of what we emit today will be boiling our planet in 33,000 years from now, and 7% will be boiling us in 100,000 years. So what we emit today cooks us for a very long time. And even if we stopped emitting today and CO2s remain stable concentrations, it would take 110 years for ocean temperatures to equilibrate and 35 for atmospheric. So we're baked in for terrible trouble for geological timescales ahead. And if you want to see what that rate of energy gain looks like right now, this is what it looks like. And that's going on all the time around us. And it's the reason why we've now lived through the 11 hottest years on record in a row, and why things are getting dramatically worse. Now, of course, global mean surface temperatures are a pretty rubbish way of assessing total energy gain. 93% of the energy gain to our planet has gone into our oceans, leaving only 7% to warm the air above us. And if you think 1.5 degrees was safe, which it evidently is not, it is also completely unachievable. It's unachievable because we've already bust through it. And you may not think we have. And that's because of the fudgery that came from the 2012 Paris deal, which says you can only state that we've reached 1.5 when a rolling 20-year average is above 1.5. And rolling 20-year averages cannot respond to sudden rapid changes, which we're seeing at the moment. So you won't be able to say we've reached 1.5 until likely 10 years after we actually have. We breached 1.63 degrees in 2003, and we're probably going to breach 1.85 within the next 14 months. So 1.5 is long over, but it's worse than that where we live, because we humans live on land. So land surface temperatures in 2004 breached 2.2, and are likely this year to breach 2.7. And in some countries or areas, it's worse. So in Britain and continental Europe, surface temperatures breached 2.5 in 2004, and will be breaching 2.8 or 2.9 this year. We're still at the poles, where global heating is 4 times faster than that of the global average, punching through 4 Celsius this year and rising very rapidly beyond. Indeed, if we have triggered what's known as a Dansgaard-Oeschger event, we're going to see sudden rapid temperature rises of 35 Celsius at the Arctic. But even with what we've got in the Arctic, we are melting sea ice. And if we look at average Arctic sea ice extent over the last 1,500 years, you'll see that it's fallen off a cliff in the previous 50 up to the year 2000. Well, if we want to see what's happened since the year 2000, we have to extend the graph down here, because this is what's happened since. So remember, this ice melt is not going to stop. It can only accelerate even if we stop emitting today, because temperatures will stay the same, which will drive this melt to continue, and worsen, which will make this accelerate yet further. So you might say, well, it'd be a good idea then to stop emitting. So 1.5 is gone. But if you thought the Paris deal was deliverable at 1.5 Celsius, we should have reduced emissions by 43% from 2019 base levels by 2030. We're actually up 7% already, and we're still rising, because here's the emissions graph. Last year, including LULUCF, so land use and so forth, we emitted nearly 60 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. And remember how long that red area lasts for. A fifth of it still boiling us in 33,000 years' time, and emissions still rising. Worse than that, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations are meant to be peaking. The Paris deal, which I say was wrong, said that if we stayed below 445 parts per million, we might stay at 1.5. Well, we've bust through that. We're already at 433.95 this year. So there's no way we're going to stay below that. And indeed, if you look at atmospheric CO2 concentrations, these being the Keeling data and Mauna Kea, you'll see that we've peaked at 433.95 already. But worse still, atmospheric CO2 concentrations are rising faster than the emissions are, because land sinks are failing. The rainforests, which used to draw down CO2, are now emitting. Arctic tundra, which used to be a store, is now emitting, and the oceans that used to absorb a lot of CO2 are now venting it. So if you look at that rate, you'll find that rate is going up, and every year now sees its fastest gain. We have uncoupled emissions from atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations. Worse still, though, we've also uncoupled Earth's energy gain and temperature rise from the concentrations of greenhouse gases. And this is because we have now collapsed surface albedo. Albedo, as you know, is the phenomenon whereby shiny things like leaves or snow and ice, or low altitude cloud indeed, reflect sunlight back into space. And we're losing the low altitude cloud for various reasons, and we're melting snow and ice, revealing dark ocean and land to absorb the heat. So if we look at surface albedo, that's on the y-axis, you'll see it has collapsed by around 0.5% in recent years, and a great deal of that has happened within the last 5 to 10 years. 0.5% doesn't sound much until you work out how much energy adding 0.5% of entire solar radiation to your planetary energy gain is. And if you look at those last few years of collapse, that's now reflected in that accelerating rise in temperature, which I spoke about early on, and the accelerating rise in Hiroshima bombs worth of energy gain. So you can see that in these data from all of the big 5 measurements, you'll see temperature was going up steeply and has very suddenly kicked off in the last 5 or 10 years. You see the same thing here on the right with ocean temperatures, a steep rise that's now suddenly become very, very significant and severe. And remember, that is not going to slow down. This is also going to accelerate. And the impacts are already severe without that acceleration. This is the loss of land ice. We've now lost nearly 9 trillion metric tons of land ice. And you'll see that that is also following an exponential function. That is only going to accelerate. We cannot stop it. And as we melt that land ice into oceans and they thermally expand, sea levels go up, and they are. And they are also going up at an accelerated rate, now by a centimetre every 2 years. Remember, that's not going to slow down. That's going to dramatically accelerate. And if we end up with this polar collapse as we lose the thermal anchors that anchor glaciers to the continental shelf, we will produce very accelerated rise indeed.
Environment stuff. Come on, I haven't got a camera on.
Sorry, I've got someone talking at the minute, so perhaps we could mute our microphones. Thank you. We've lost 73% of all species on the planet, of all animal life on the planet since I was aged 8. We're currently losing around 6 species an hour. And let's just think too of the wild weather we're achieving. These were the fires in Canada in 2023 and the impact on air quality in New York in an unfiltered image. India in 2024 breached 52 Celsius. On the right there was Valencia, baked soil, followed by very sudden rainfall. That probably sounds familiar to you from this week in Britain, where we've had the east of England 88% deficient in its rainfall, and baking temperatures suddenly followed by a massive thunderstorm and flooding in London on Monday. This, of course, was Los Angeles at the end of the year before last. And these are the data from this year, when the Antarctic winter saw us at 15 plus 15 Celsius, and Australia breached nearly 50. And let's just look at this last year. This was last spring. The National Drought Group meant, because we had the driest spring recorded for over 132 years. That was followed by the December and January of this year, where we had 40 days of continuous rainfall in much of the country, taking 2 billion off crop value and flooding the country, followed by an 88% reduction in rainfall in large sections of England, followed by this massive heat dome in May, followed by a cold snap, followed by the same again that we've had this week. And to make clear, talk of adapting to this is nonsense. Britain is £3 trillion in debt, spending 104 billion a year servicing the debt. And the cost of fixing this would be crazy. Steel rails get 20 degrees hotter than the air temperature, and you have to put speed restrictions on at track temperature of 46, i.e. 30 or so air temperature. That's why we've had rail speed restrictions on most rail lines this week of 18 miles an hour. Thermal expansion also causes rails to buckle. At the same time, tarmac temperatures are 20 degrees higher than air temperatures because they're black. And standard tarmac or asphalt bleeds bitumen at around 50. So again, temperatures about 30, which makes roads subject to damage. Stagnant air means wind turbines don't work. Hot solar panels don't work efficiently in heat. Energy demand goes up because of air conditioning, and energy supply drops because you run out of hydroelectric power, as we're already seeing in Italy. And we're now seeing this hit in France as of 35 minutes ago. The French took all their nuclear reactors offline because there isn't enough cool water to cool them. And these sorts of effects are collapsing economies. We know from multiple sources that we're already losing around $4,500 a second to climate change-driven extreme weather events. This paper was redacted and repeated. It's actually now 17.8%, so it's not shy of that. We're committed to a loss, therefore, of around a fifth of the global economy, and this paper was in 2023. So in around 23 years from now. But we're also told by multiple economists that we're likely to lose a minimum of 50% of GDP within the next 50 years, were we to get there. Indeed, the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries and Insurers tells us that our economy may not exist at all if we don't immediately mitigate climate change. It's going to be a lot worse than this as we go forwards, because we've now learned that sulfate particles from shipping fuel were seeding low altitude cloud, and as we've cleaned the shipping fuel up, we've lost that reflective layer. The same is applying with coal dust. In fact, coal dust we have to get rid of, black soot, which is driving climate change, as are the greenhouse gas emissions. But some of those particles also reflect light back into space. When we stop burning these fossil fuels, including the coal, that loss of sort of umbrella effect is the equivalent of adding 200 parts per million to atmospheric CO2. So you'll get the heating effect going from now at 433 to 633. And bear in mind, the last time we had the CO2 concentrations we got today was 11 million years ago, and it took geological timescales to reach that point, and we've achieved this in 50 years. So 1.5 degrees is dead, and the bad news is that you will be, and I will be, and I'm 63, and my son will be, and he's 20, very, very soon indeed, without immediate real action. Because whilst I chair the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change, when we look at heat stress and particulate pollution and Zika and dengue and salmonellosis and Vibrio and malaria and all these things, that is not what will kill us. It is the societal collapse that is coming. The banks think we're in for a minimum of 3 Celsius. And actually, with these changes in surface albedo, we're probably looking at 5 Celsius over the next few decades. not as a plateau, but as a waypoint to 7 to 11. So what does 3 Celsius look like, which is now the minimum really of where we're going? Well, the faculty of actuaries and insurers again tell us we lose 50% of the global economy, half the world's population migrate and die, and in terms of the impacts on nature, we face a high level of extinction of higher orders of life on Earth. That's us. It's not just the planetary scientists and insurers and actuaries that are saying this. This is our own Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs this year. They say Britain's food and water supply are almost certain to be on a declining collapse trajectory already, with a realistic possibility that by 2030, they are at strategic risk of catastrophic failure. Think about that. This isn't a risk going forwards. This is a realistic possibility of catastrophic failure to our food and water supply in 50 months' time from now. And it's not just them. The Joint Intelligence Committee this year had a redacted report released under a Freedom of Information Act, redacted because we know what's in it, some of us, and it's considered too frightening to say. But what they did say was this: the UK's national security is under severe threat from climate change, looming collapse of our vital natural ecosystems, and food shortage, with economic disaster are potentially just years away. And when that happens, society will collapse. But there are many other reasons why we will bake that collapse in, and that's what's often known as tipping points. You go over one and flip from one state to another. I think it's much more like firing a gun, because when you fire a gun, the damage is done and you can't reload the bullet with the powder you just exploded and put the bullet back in. It's a binary state change, and we have triggered them already. We know from Tim Lenson's group from last year that we have now committed our planet to the loss of all of its coral reefs. The ecosystems that live on them, the ecosystems that depend on those ecosystems. We will lose the barrier reef function of those reefs, meaning you'll get salt ingress and erosion, and the people that live on that food in the sea and the people who grow crops will find they can no longer live. This cold blob at the top here is going to kill the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. It represents melting fresh water from the heating poles there in the Arctic, and it also reflects lack of ingress of hot water coming from the biggest ocean current of the Northern Hemisphere, the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. Here it is, drawing in hot water from the right-hand side there, from the Pacific, coming up past us at the top left, as the Gulf Stream, amongst other branches. We've lost 15% of the 117 trillion watt power that is delivering to us already. And remember, the melt isn't going to go away, and so this is going to progress. What does that mean? Well, we've got papers just recently showing that we are going to get loss of at least 50% of the AMOC in coming decades. That prevents nutrient upwelling that feeds entire ocean ecosystems, and they will collapse. And with them, all the ecosystems that depend on those, and that will include us. The monsoon cycles that feed billions will collapse, and London will get very cold. We'll be down to -20 or -30 in winter. Over time, the Arctic ice field will extend to Hull, and we'll have winter sea ice off the southern United Kingdom. But at the same time, we'll have summer temperatures way above 50, and we won't have enough water to be able to grow any crops, and neither will most of Europe. We had this paper now, just in beginning of June, looking at other tipping points too. And they were looking at the collapse of the Amazon rainforest with temperature rises of 1.5 to 1.9 Celsius. Let me remind you, we're there already. If you then add deforestation from the human hand or from fires of 22, 20, 28%, and remember, we are at 20% already, we lose 77% of the Amazon. So it's for all of these reasons the IPCC warned us even 4 years ago that without immediate concerted global action, we'd miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. But finally, they were wrong. And they were wrong, as all the other modelling I've just given you was wrong, because it's much, much worse than that. The predictions have always been wrong. These I'm about to show you what are known as the burning ember plots, and they come from each IPCC report. In each bar there, starting on the left, 2001, 2009, 2014, 2022. And the really high impact bad stuff is the sort of maroon colour, and the not really detectable is the white. And you'll see we were predicting moderately bad stuff at 5 or 6 degrees in 2001. We're now saying we're going to get moderate or very severe stuff happening at 1.5 to 2. That's where we're at now. Indeed, we've had another paper from Nature 2 weeks ago saying that for droughts in key breadbaskets, rainfall extremes over highly populated areas, and fire weather extremes across forests, 2 degrees of global warming may turn out to be much more extreme than previous model average projections of 4. So all the stuff I told you earlier on about societal collapse is optimistic. This paper has suggested very much the same thing, but it's interesting what it's pointing out is the severe extreme weather events go up with CO2 emissions and temperature rise, but compounded events, the things where you get, for instance, severe drought followed by sudden intense rainfall with a following drought to go with it, those sorts of coupled events go up exponentially with CO2 rise. So what used to be rare fat tail events are much worse. So I'm going to stop talking. If you want to, we can talk about actions we can take. But the point I've got to get to is that I am fed up to the back teeth now with conversations about net zero, which doesn't exist. Direct air carbon capture and storage has drawn down 913,000 tons of CO2 in total ever in the history of humanity. That's 2 hours of United States emissions. We have no data at all that any other offsetting program has made any difference for 25 years. And the only hope you've got is to get to zero emissions now. So I am not going to listen anymore to, we've got a net zero target for scope 1, 2, or 3, or not named, without a trajectory by 2045. Because if any of you want to be alive in 10 years' time, and you want to have children that are alive, you need to be doing one hell of a lot more than that. And if I'm frankly honest, I don't know anyone on this call particularly well. And therefore, if people want to kill themselves, it really doesn't bother me greatly. But it really, really bothers me that you don't take action and that my 20-year-old son doesn't make it to 30. And that, sadly, is a situation we find ourselves in now. So I say I'll stop talking. If we wish to discuss further, we can. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Hugh. So very, very sobering presentation. Questions for Hugh? I have a question, Hugh. So on the call we have, so as you know, CAFA, we convene and support trade associations, professional bodies, institutes, societies. And our mission is to speed up the transition, the action to tackle basically everything you've just raised on the call today. I guess it's a simple question, but one with a really complex answer. What would you say to all the professional bodies and trade associations that on the call today? There's about 20 or so, I think, and we have a network of more than 420. And growing, and we're providing practical support to those associations as well. So we're doing the best that we can with the limited resources that we've got to speed up action. And we do all of that for free as well. Yeah. What do you say? What can you say, and what do you suggest to all the associations that are on the call now that represent individuals and organisations who, quite frankly, quite often are very focused on what membership organisations are always focused on, which is about their sector, their profession. From what I'm hearing from what you're saying, Hugh, is that there'll be no business, there'll be no professions, there'll be no sectors in
Yeah.
10 years. So what's the wake up call, and what do the associations on the call right now need to do?
Well, it's a good question, and I will tell you what I think is the answer. So we've had complete inaction by individuals, civil society, bodies, politic or business, in frank honesty, ever. And the reason is we've got a context tessellation, and tessellated structures are very strong. So governments say, well, we can't make business do this because they'll howl at us, and the public don't like it, which is why Labour didn't even mention climate change in the last electoral campaign. So we can't get voters like it, and business won't let us, so we won't move. Businesses say, well, if government won't legislate, we won't move, and if the people won't make us do it, then we can't sell a market. And individuals say, well, if government won't make us do it and legislate, and businesses won't provide us with that service, we can't do anything. And then you get the same globally. So each government says, as George Osborne famously did, well, if we act, we disadvantage ourselves against another country. So we're only going to move as fast as the other slowest members. And every business says, well, there's no point in me changing because someone will offshore or another company abroad will do it. And every individual says, there's no point in me doing it because the person in China or India won't do it. So no one does anything. We have to change that. And the first thing we have to change is to remind ourselves that we were raised, I hope most of us, to do the right thing. Not what was profitable, not what was expedient, not to go, well, if I don't do it, someone else will. To do the right thing, personally and professionally and politically. And by doing that, we lead others to do the same. So we as individuals can act, and we can get every member person in our organizations to act, and we can help them do simple things that make a big difference by moving the money. Change investments, change who you bank with, because every major bank funds fossil fuel extraction, another $1 trillion last year into fossil fuel extraction from the major banks. We move our power suppliers and we electrify where we can. We change our transport. We move to plant-based diets because 38% of emissions come from food. We act politically and make it absolutely clear to every party of every colour across the spectrum that we will not give them our vote unless they are incredibly aggressive on climate change. And then we spread the message, and we're told that 7 other people love us or respect each one of us enough to do what we ask them to do. And if you get 7 people to do those 7 things I outlined in each week, on the 12th week of that spread, 16 billion people have changed. That's nearly twice the number of people on the planet. And the financial markets have shifted, and so has the political framing. So let's remember, as individuals, we can do things. But the other bit is the corporate piece. And it's been very interesting, Alison. I don't know what your experience has been. I've been in the mixture of high levels, intergovernmental and governmental and business. And I go between the two sectors. And I hear from government and intergovernmental, it's about time business just got on with this and started doing this, right? They've got control over their own destiny. They should be doing this. And then I go to the business meetings where they say, government should be legislating to tell us what to do. And no one's doing anything. I think governments will follow business. If business starts getting together, and I do understand pre-competition law and all those other things, but if every organisation and representative organisation on this call today convened for a one-day meeting and said, we are going to jump together en masse and show leadership. We are all going to do these things. The rules have changed, and we're not waiting to be regulated and go to government and tell them. Government would move into that space. They would support you. You've given the permissive environment for them to take the actions. And bear in mind, being fair to any government of the last 20 years, they've got very little political capital and financial capital to spend. Very little indeed. So we can really help them. So I think we've got to lead. And for the selfish reasons I described, I mean, I think I don't give a monkeys about anything except my boy. Okay, so I mean, I can give you a very long answer. I'll give you a slightly shorter one. I mean, unfortunately, for years we've been told that you can't tell people scary things because it puts them off. So for 26 years, no one's heard that it's bad. And if they have, the message is basically being, hey, wouldn't it be nicer if we all lived this way because it'd be nicer? And everyone goes, well, nicer than my skiing holiday and my privately educated kids or my nice car, whatever else it might be. And if you're poor, you don't give a monkeys because you've just got to try and get food on the table. The behavioral science is really clear how you do this. Number one, you do it yourself, because it's a bit like a smoker telling someone else to stop. They're not going to listen. So firstly, put your own house in order and quick. Secondly, communicate in the way I've done and give people clear, scare the bejesus out of them with the truth, and then give them things they can do. And that was first shown by Bob Geldof, actually, back in the days of Live Aid, and some of you won't remember that, but he was the first person to do that psychology, to say, well, if you show people a picture of a starving Ethiopian and you put the phone number right next to it to pledge money, people do. But the longer you leave it, even minutes or hours, the decay is really quick. So when you tell people what the threat is, they will freeze and run unless you give them something to do now, in which case they feel empowered, which is why I gave you those 7 things to do. We also know from George Marshall's work that because we're all social animals, that if we then lead with those 7 other people, people want to be part of your gang. There are 7 people, I say, who like you, love you, respect you that much that they just want to be part of your gang. Right? And everyone had their gang at school, the smokers behind the bike shed or the rugby jocks or whatever it might have been. So we bring those people with us in that way. But what we haven't got time for anymore is a long process of persuasion. And we also know, of course, in fact, that most people are fairly bovine or ovine, in that they just go along with what happens. So if we as leaders say, this is the truth, we are doing it, it is happening, most people tend to go along with it, and they might complain for a little bit, but they soon fall into line, much as we saw with the congestion zone in London. Hated and howled about, and then loved within 12 months, a bit like the smoking ban in pubs. Hated for a while and then immediately accepted. But the real issue now is action, and then bring people with us from action rather than trying to persuade them. No, it's reported. The atmosphere doesn't know you're reporting. The atmosphere just sees the physics. And remember just where we're at. So again, we're bus 1.5. The science was wrong. We've doubled Earth's energy gain in 4 years. Everything we thought is now on steroids and out of control. But if you even thought the Paris deal was achievable and safe, we had to reduce emissions by 43% in 4 years from now, from 2019, and it's gone up by 7%. You have to be cutting your emissions. Sorry, we are experiencing a high volume of. Thank you. We've gone up by 7%. So even if you thought you'd have to do Paris, you have to be cutting your emissions by 14.8% a year across scope 1 to 3 now. And that's not enough. So we need to refocus. Not have this, we're being more sustainable, we've got an ESG lead, we've got a target for something, oh, we're doing a little bit of stuff, we're doing more recycling. It's all nonsense. And in medicine, when you treat a disease, you have to do what's necessary and sufficient. So if you were unfortunate enough to get breast cancer, you would get the surgery you needed and a full course of chemotherapy. What I wouldn't do is start the surgery and then stop it and give you half a course, because you'd still die. You have to do what's necessary and sufficient. And here we need to be at 0 emissions very, 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 very quickly, very quickly. And companies need to focus on that and work backwards as an engineer would. How do we cut our emissions, let's say, by 60% in the next 4 years? It's going to be radical. How do we do that? And if you can't, you get together with other people, such as those on this call, and say, how do we do this together? Where's our leverage power to be able to get a power purchase agreement in place so all our electricity for all of us is 100% renewable? How do we change our supply chains, etc.?
And that is one of the really unique roles that membership body can play, is to collectively mobilize an entire membership and like you say, negotiate deals like that, and incentivize them to just really take action quickly and lead by example as well.
I agree. We're doing this. We've pulled together 56 medical organisations now, Royal Colleges, that each represent around 1.2 million healthcare workers. But we've now pulled that together with the European, let's say the European Society of Cardiology, that represents 28 membership organisations which represent cardiologists, and the European Society of Intensive Care that represents 29 different organisations in countries that represent. So we are trying to accrete in exactly the way you are and get people to jump together, because if we do that, then the markets change, and then there's first mover advantage. We've all got to get together now, and I think we're going to have some strange partnerships that will have to deliver this, but deliver what we must. So please do get back to me if there's anything at all I can do for any of you. I gladly will. And
we really value that. And just, Hugh, it's interesting what you were talking about, where you're convening different organisations in around your specific sector and ecosystem in healthcare. We're doing exactly the same. So we're trying to cluster associations together that represent a value chain. So together we can achieve more. It is complex, and as you know, membership organisations, that's pretty slow to move at the best of times. So we're really trying to ramp up, speed up the action, and really value. And thank you for your flexibility, Ruth. Really appreciate that.
I had a question for Hugh. So apologies if this is getting too much into the details of the issue. I'm not seeing the bigger picture due to the urgency of the whole situation. But something struck me about what you said about net zero specifically, because businesses are asked increasingly to reach net zero, to follow net zero best practice, and we, as defined within the corporate standards, is defined as 90 to 95% reductions, down to everything, essentially reducing everything that's possible to reduce. And I just wanted to check whether we have that same understanding of net zero, and if we have, whether it's a relevant concept or not.
Well, in a nutshell, it will be relevant at some point, but it isn't now.
That's what I mean.
So we have the first issues are that when people set a net zero target, there's normally not a trajectory, and it's not science-based. We need to be at net zero emissions going out, and we need that to be happening within few years. The second is most people don't label whether it's scope 1, 2, or 3. The third issue is people define it differently. So they might say, for instance, people will claim that by stopping a tree getting chopped down, that they can count that to offset against emissions because that tree will remain standing with otherwise got chance. That is not reducing the emissions you're putting out. It might be stopping a further increase, but it isn't reducing them. So the language is often wrong. And then finally, you've got a very limited range of ways in which you can draw down carbon dioxide. We know from the nature-based solutions, planting trees, if you planted a tree everywhere, there isn't a tree, and restored every peat system and every mangrove swamp, at most, even if the trees didn't burn down, which all of the Californian stock has in the last 2 years, and even if the peat didn't burn away and the mangroves didn't get washed away, and even everything stayed there, the most you can draw down is about 5 years worth of emissions, which is worth having, but it's nowhere near enough to keep us alive, even if they stayed. Direct air capture does not work at the moment. It's experimental. As I say, it's 2 hours worth of US emissions in total that have been drawn down. That leaves you with some other things like weathering basalt, which sort of does work, but we don't have that yet at scale. So the technologies just aren't there at the moment. Now, so we've got to go to nearly zero emissions. Then we also have to go negative with drawdown. So we are going to need to deploy all of those things as well. But bear in mind, they're going to be very, 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 very expensive. You're going to need roughly 1,500, just shy of 1,500 large-scale direct air capture plants. Remember, that will only take 0.35 to 0.68 degrees off maximum temperature rise, even when they're fully deployed, because there's a limit to where the geological storage is. And we know that that limit gets reached and you've only saved yourself a little bit. We're also going to have to, in my view, for solar radiation management, because we can't stop us all dying now by stopping emitting and even drawing down. We've got too much baked in positive feedback loops now. We've got 17 positive feedback loops heating in play at the minute. So I think we are going to have carbon drawdown. It's just that none of it works at the moment, except maybe basalt, if you could get enough of it crushed out there and spread on land. So you're much better, in my view, to take the money you would have spent on offsetting and using it on getting your CO2 emissions down and funding a meeting of all the representative organisations together to work out how they do this. And I keep coming back to engineers because they're very good at this, process engineers, to say we need to get to that point. How do we get to that point? As opposed to saying, what is it that we can do now? Oh, look, that's not very much and it's not very effective. We need to work backwards.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a very helpful answer, because I think that your point, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about anything, but the point that you make about reducing as much as possible, sort of 2 points I want to make actually. The point about reducing as much as possible and then having drawdown when the technologies are available, which they aren't. Or aren't at scale. 100% agree. Direct air capture doesn't work. It's $800 a ton at minimum as well, and we have some options for removals, but they need to scale, as you've pointed out. So the really interesting thing you said is the difference in definitions. And I want to make this point because I've personally been banging the drum, and CAFA's been banging the drum about corporate net zero, which is aligned with the definition that you've given. And I just wanted to make sure that definition, so maximum reductions as fast as possible, 50 to 60% within the next few years, and then a tiny bit of removals to manage that endpoint by 2050. Just wanted to make sure we're aligned on.
Yeah, we need to get to the 100% removal really quickly and then draw down. So we need to do everything we can really fast and then start deploying those technologies when they're there. They will be, as you say, they're not available now, so we have to wait for them to get there. And I think we will end up with some form of solar radiation management, but we'll need an international treaty for that, because people are worried about the weaponization of that technology, because obviously you could pretty well neuter a country by changing their weather. So that has to be, has to be taken into account. I mean, bear in mind that even if the Paris deal was looking at this 43% reduction emissions from 2019, it also included carbon capture and storage, direct air carbon capture storage now. So what we're meant to have done is drawn down 4.93 billion metric tons by now, and we've drawn down less than 1 million. We're nowhere near where we're meant to be. We're a factor of 1,000 off, about 4,000 off.
100%. I mean, there's just, sorry, I know we're running over, but this is just such an essential conversation. You've made so many interesting points, and the ones about the underestimation also of climate risk, as the IPCC tends to flatten out scenarios and remove outliers. And then this is why the IFOA's work is also so important, because they apply the risk assessment lens, which goes beyond physical science bases. So so much to talk about, and so many interesting points. I'm wondering, so if we do agree on the actions, reducing emissions, all of that, on scaling the removals, but spending all our money and all our resources on reductions, what do we do about the part that's already baked in?
That's going to need the drawdown later when the technology is there, and I think it will need solar radiation management. We've run the experiment by cleaning up shipping fuels and seeing the reduction in sulfate seeded low altitude cloud over the Pacific that's added, well, it's the heating equivalent of 110 parts per million of CO2. So we've had that natural experiment, and we could go back to salt seeding, for instance, over the Pacific quite quickly, without probably affecting international treaties, because they're international waters. So it is possible that we could go back to doing that. But the main bit is to get the emissions down. And of course, the key bit too on this, we've all got to remember, is about leverage points and tipping. In that if we spend the money on drawing down and decarbonising grids and really going hell for leather, that moves investments, it moves hedge fund money. The capital starts flowing to follow where you're spending, because that's the nature of markets. And we've seen that already. It's why Donald Trump will never get coal taking back over in the States, because that game's been lost, right? It's always going to now be cheaper to go for others. So the more we add the money to the right side of the seesaw, the more the tilt happens and things flow in the right direction. So there's huge leverage power if we use our corporate spends in this way and our individual spends. It's a messaging problem because actually they haven't removed the worst case scenario, and it's interesting. So you probably know on this call, everyone, the difference between the RCPs, the representative concentration pathways that existed, and the RCPs had a number attached to them, which was the level of radiative forcing. So RCP 8.5 was 8.5 watts per square meter. And that was based upon an understanding of the physics of what a doubling in CO2 concentration would do to the power gain on the planet measured in watts. So there was thought to be X amount of CO2 goes up means Y amount of increase in, therefore this emission scenario would take you to an end result of 8.5 watts per square meter. That was then changed to the SSPs, which was the social pathways, in other words, the policy pathways that would take you to the concentration pathways. Now, that's the emission trajectory pathways that were through behavior. Now, what they've done is said, we're retiring the worst case for that because it looks as if global emissions might soon be plateauing off. So if in the actions that people take to drive down the emissions, it looks like we are going to see such actions, and therefore we're not going to be in the worst case situation. But that's different from the coupling to the RCP watts per square meter. And it's those models were themselves wrong because we hadn't factored in albedo effects. So actually, if you were to say, let's go to the emission scenario that keeps us at a safe temperature in the worst case, we are way, way over the worst case. We are now, given the radiative forcing, we're way north of RCP 8.5. So it's a misrepresentation by them. And a lot of us have had conversations with them about this because it's allowed people to understand it to say, oh, look, the worst case isn't going to happen. The worst case in terms of temperature rise and energy gain is the best that we can get now. It's going to be catastrophically worse the way we're going, but the social and structural pathways that lead to emission change haven't. We've just uncoupled those things between them. So we may well plateau emissions this year, excluding land use. That's the bit that they're referring to. And that's where I think they were wrong in their messaging. They should have just said, looking at the social behavioural bits that lead to emissions, that is going well. But what is not going well is the energy gain and where we're on that track for, because it's catastrophically bad. Yeah, it's a good point.
I think I need to actually apologize for spreading that messaging at some point during the past month. So sharing the RCP8 news. So yeah, apologies if that created any confusion.
No, it's fine. It's the difference in SSPs and RCPs, and we are. And if you're interested, if you ping me afterwards, there's a short piece that we sent back to them about that, which is only a couple of paragraphs, but I'll gladly send it to you if you're interested. So you've got a sort of more geeky, nerdy bit of text. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Good.
I'm conscious of time. I've put just a few items in the chat, so everyone's got that. And there's heaps of people that have dropped off already. So really value everybody's time and interest and commitment. Hugh, thank you so much. Apologies again, Ruth, but I think everyone will confirm it was worth it to hear Hugh, and it's very inspiring in a stark way. It really is. It's a really strong reminder of the mission of CAFA and actually the powerful position that we're in and the associations in our network are in, and the professional bodies in our network as well, to just really ramp up and speed up that collective action. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, and do shout if I can help further, but thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. Thanks, Hugh. Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye now.